And I am about to begin. So welcome all. Thank you very much for being here. Today I'll be talking about altered states of consciousness and mental health. Basically, I will begin by defining consciousness, which is something very challenging to define. Religion, altered states of consciousness, and mental illness. After that, I will discuss briefly about Freud on religion and religious experiences. And I will talk very little about Jung's viewpoint on religious experiences. Then I will briefly discuss William James's view on religious experiences. Then we will move on to talk about Alcott's reminiscences on the writing of Isis Unveiled. We will also briefly discuss on Sinnett's annotations on HPB's biography. We will discuss also viewpoints that claiming that Elena Petrovna Blavatsky was suffering of DID or dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder. After that, we will briefly see the World Psychiatric Association statements on spirituality and religion and religious experience. And then we will also discuss why the World Psychiatric Association statement is important. And then we will close by discussing how do we know if a religious experience is psychopathological. In other words, is linked to mental illness. So it's very difficult to define words in general. This is one of concepts. This is one of the most challenging problems that we have in academia. Of course, this is not an academic lecture, but in talking about consciousness, mental illness, religious experience, altered states of consciousness, I have to try to explain you in general lines the meaning of each one of these concepts so we can move forward in this presentation. By mental illness today, we mean experiences that cause suffering, family disturbances, occupational disruption, inability to function in meaningful and healthy ways socially. Then you can say, Erica, the definition of mental illness as defined as something that causes suffering is problematic because, for example, a couple may break up in a relationship, they will suffer, but they don't have a mental illness. So this is a very general definition, just to give some general guidelines, right? Now, what is religion? This is perhaps one of the most difficult debates that we have in academy, in the academia, along with the very, very difficult debate on consciousness, which other speakers, as Rupert Sheldrake, Bernard Kastrup, they will be introducing to you why it's so difficult to understand what consciousness is. The aim of my lecture today, however, is not to explain what consciousness is, but I have to give a definition just as a guideline. So the definition that I'm giving to consciousness is it's awareness and self-consciousness, self-awareness. Okay, this is a very simple and straightforward definition of consciousness. Religion here is defined as a cultural order, as a particular way of organizing the world. You see, the meaning of religion, the concept of religion is very difficult to define. One of the reasons is that in the ancient world, uh, we, the concept of religion did not exist in ancient Greece, in the Sanskrit language, and so on. In the ancient world, religion was a way of life. Nobody would be asking to the other person, oh, what is your religion? No, they would perhaps ask you which God you adore most, or something like this. But religion was part of our everyday life, of their everyday life. The separation between religion, or the very concept of religion, is something that enters history and the Western mentality in a late period. Now, we could ask, we are in the European School of Philosophy and talking about outraged states of consciousness. How is religion related to the Theosophical Society? Well, the Theosophical Society is an esoteric organization. Esotericism has been defined by Febvre. This does not mean that I agree with his definition. I'm just giving you a definition, a general definition now, as a form of thought based on correspondences, living nature, imagination, and mediations, experience of transmutations, and so forth. And esotericism is a subcategory within the general category of religion. So this is the way that the Theosophical Society is linked to religion. Um, it's considered a subcategory of religion. All right. Now, what is religious experience? Religious experience is also very difficult and complicated concept, but it's an experience a person attributes to a religious, spiritual, or transcendental meaning to it. But then it's a very problematic, because then we may have someone who is an atheist, who doesn't belong to any religion, and he may have what we could classify as a religious experience. He may hear voices. He may suddenly, I don't know, maybe, for example, a person who doesn't believe in God, who is not related to any religion or esotericism, may suddenly be doing a work and listen to his mother giving him farewell somehow, because she's leaving this world, and then he calls his mother, and he just learned that his mother passed away at the very moment he heard that. And then how can you say that is a religious experience, because he has no religion? But it is considered within the category, let's say, of religious experiences. And what is an outraged state of consciousness? We have alternate and outraged states of consciousness. They may be, there are states of consciousness that may lead to different ways of experiencing or knowing things. Some examples of alternate states, outraged states of consciousness is automatic writing, clairvoyance, trance, prophetic speaking, and so on. Now, the first systematic study on such experiences was conducted by the Society for Psychical Research, founded in 1882. Most of you know the Society of Psychical Research because it was the society from which sent Hodgson to India to explore HPB's psychic abilities. It was this society that sent Hodgson to Adyar, and then most of you know that the Hodgson report was devastating for her because Hodgson accused Madame Blavatsky of charlatanism. He accused her of being faking, and her experiences and the message that she was receiving from the Mahatmas. And she was labeled as the greatest charlatan of the 19th century. That was devastating for her and for the Theosophical Society. The scandal was so big that she left India and went back to England. But thanks to the work of Leslie Price and Vernon Harrison, the Society for Psychical Research revealed the Hodgson report, and they ratified the Hodgson report, and they said that it's a report biased, non-academic, that should be completely and utterly disregarded. But this apology came, of course, I think it was in 1986. It was quite a long time after HPB had already passed away. The report, in fact, affected profoundly the life of HPB and her health. She didn't live much longer after that. Change the slides. Now, as you saw, the first society that tried to investigate scientifically psychic or religious experiences, I will be using the term religious experiences, was the Society for Psychical Research. But then we have also Freud, who had an immense influence in the way people were seeing religion and approaching religion. And Freud belongs to the psychoanalytical, phenomenological tradition approach. And he claimed that religion is comparable to childhood neurosis. Freud didn't like anything related to religion, really. According to him, the awareness of our mortality makes us to create defense mechanisms to feel secure. Religion is a defense mechanism to help us to deal with the fact we will die. Freud claimed that religious experience is psychopathological. In other words, religious experience is a type of mental illness, such as a neurosis, hysteria, obsessive disorders, and so on. This is very serious because this viewpoint supports the notion that anyone who has, let's say, altered state of consciousness or an experience that cannot be explained scientifically or a religious experience in the psychoanalytical tradition of Freud is considered a person suffering of mental illness. But that's not the case, as you will see. So Freud's viewpoint influenced psychiatrists into constructing religious belief in psychopathological terms. This is a quote from Freud, from his work now, The Future of Illusion. He says, religion is a system of wishful illusion together with a disavowal of reality, such as we find nowhere else, but in a state of blissful hallucinatory confusion. This is a very heavy, let's say, viewpoint in relation to religion, but this viewpoint influenced deeply mental health professional across different areas. Now, here it's a very short quote from Jung. Jung also, Jung Jung called himself as a mystical fool. So I'm not sure Jung changed his position in relation to religion, but then I will say Jung and others, they have called attention to the appeal of occult metaphysics to the psychopathically disposed and the danger that they may encourage and precipitate latent psychosis, especially paranoid, schizophrenia, and hysteria. So Jung didn't have a very sympathetic view on religion, at least when he supported this viewpoint. I suspect he may have changed a little his position at some point of his life based on what he writes on his red book. Now, moving forward, another very, very influential personality in the beginning of the study of religious experiences, altered states of consciousness, and all that is William James. William James, he was actually also a member of the Theosophical Society for some times. He was an influential psychologist, professor of philosophy at Harvard University. Well, he gives a definition of religion which is not really very meaningful to our presentation now, but he's an empiricist. Here he links religious experiences to feelings, to emotions, to sense perception, and so on. And he suggested two psychological types or temperaments of religious persons. The first is the type or the temperament he calls the schizo, which are the persons that have a negative. Well, actually, I have made a confusion. Here should be the health-minded, and here should be the schizo. So, here I'm talking about the health-minded now. So he defined, he created two temperaments of people, two kind of people of having religious experiences. According to him, one was the schizo, and the other the health-minded. The schizo is the temper which, according with James, augments or makes evil something larger than what it is. This type of person has a pessimistic approach to life, and is characterized by religious melancholy. It sees the world as a remote, strange, sinister, and uncanny way. One of the examples that he uses to link to the sick mind temper is Tolstoy, and the other one is Elena Petrovna Blavatsky. He includes HPB into the category of the sick soul. Why? Because the sick soul, it has the idea, it holds the idea for him that we have to die for this self, to be reborn again into a divine and more fulfilling one. So, for example, in The Voice of the Silence, involves the notion of self-sacrifice, that we have to renounce, as The Voice of the Silence suggests, that we should, when we reach final liberation and bliss and nirvana, we should renounce that state to return to earth and to reincarnate as a bodhisattva to help humanity to evolve. So this notion of self-sacrifice, this notion of dying to something and reborn into something else is what it's linked to the temperament type that James characterizes as the sick soul. And then the other religious temperament type that James have is the one the health-minded, with a positive attitude, with happiness and freedom. So he uses the example, for example, in Christianity, he refers to the repentance of sins or the Catholic practice of confession and absolution as a healthy minded practice, allowing people to move away from evil. In terms of religious experience, for example, the happiness of the health minded is, for example, the experience of union with the divine. The health minded is driven by a voluntary impulse of looking for positive and good things, and by an involuntary emotional condition of experiencing things positively. Of course, these two main categories, psychological now, categories uh, of James have influenced our psychologists. For example, positive psychology, which is a new branch, relative new branch of psychology, has been inspired on the notion of the health-minded person of James's. Um, Personally, I find these two categories very reductionist for religious experience. Um, there is always a blending, in my opinion, of the types. I don't think there is the happy type and the melancholic type, and the things are so straightforward. And of course, but this is not the main focus of my lecture today. My lecture aims to show you the link of altered states of consciousness with mental health, specifically focusing on HPB's case. And this I'm showing you just to, I mentioned Freud and William James, just to show you how they have linked religious experience to the Freud to the psychoanalytical tradition, and James to the psychological traditions, in trying to allocate types of temperaments to different to certain types of religious experiences. Now, okay. Now we will move forward to try to understand briefly, to discuss briefly, to show you briefly, but in very, very superficially, because I would need 5 lectures to discuss all, let's say, religious experience or spiritual experiences that Blavatsky had. So this is a very short and brief description. So Alcott, in his diary, he dedicates a chapter focusing on his reminiscences on the way HPB wrote Is Unveiled. And this is very important because this is the first-hand witnessing of what was happening when Blavatsky was writing Is Unveiled, how she was changing, what was happening to her. First of all, he says that when the HPB started writing Isis Unveiled in New York at the famous La Mazerie is the name of the apartment. They called the La Mazerie. And actually, they actually had a monkey there in the La Mazerie, not a real monkey. It was like a small, I don't know, it's like a toy, which was a monkey, in which they named Darwin. Sorry, I had to say that, but I find that so funny. But anyway, sorry. Anyway, Alcott says that they had a very small library, very, very small, when HPB was writing Isis Unveiled, with only around 100 books. And according to Walcott, HPB, she was a channel to write Isis. He uses specifically the word channel. He says, open quotes, He's mentioned that Blavatsky had no plan to write Isis. So he says, if she had no plan, despite all her knowledge, does that not go to prove that the work was not of her own conception, that she was but the channel through which this tide of fresh, vital essence was being powered into the stagnant pool of modern spiritual thought? He's trying to say she didn't have a plan. I mean, she started writing. This indicates that she was the channel for something superior, for something higher. And then he goes on saying, where did HPB draw the materials which compose Isis and which cannot be traced to accessible literary sources of quotation? By accessible literary sources of quotation, he was meaning their personal library. Huh? From her soul senses, he says, from her teachers, the brothers, adepts, sages, masters, as they have been variously called. How do I know it? He says, by working 2 years with her on Isis and many more years on other literary work. That's then again he says in the old diary leaves the following: to watch her at work was a rare and never to be forgotten experience. We sat at opposite sides of one big table, usually, and I could see her every movement. Her pen would be flying over the page when she would suddenly stop, look out into space with the vacant eye of the clairvoyant seer, shorten her vision as though to look at something held invisible in the air before her, and begin copying on her paper what she saw. The quotation finished, her eyes would resume their natural expression, and she would go on writing until again stopped by a similar interruption. What I find very, very interesting in this quote is that how Olcott was observing every detail when HPB was writing. And he says that the movement of her eyes, her expressions, and so on. And then, now, Olcott specifically mentions that she was changing personality when she was writing Isis Unveiled. And he tells us some of the characteristics he noticed in terms of change in Blavatsky when she was writing her book. He says first, there was a change in the handwriting style, which in a fourfold ways. First, he says she would write in a very small and plain handwriting. Another style was very bold and free. Another style was plain, of medium size and very legible. Another one was scratchy and hard to read. He also mentioned the difference in her English writing style. He says that sometimes she was writing in a way that Olcott needed to make many corrections in every line. And sometimes she was passing pages and pages and pages. He was passing pages and pages without needing to correct any grammar, spell, or mistake. Now, just a minute, I think I'm missing any slides. Yes, apparently I'm missing any slide. He also mentions that he found very interesting that many times when HPB was behaving in a different way, as if she was someone else, she would walk in a different way also. She would talk with a different tone of voice. And in general, her behavior would change. And based on the commentaries of Olcott and others in the other religions and other theosophists, some scholars decided to say that HPB was suffering of multiple personality disorder, which I will show you the reasons why very soon. Now we move forward to see, for example, um, Sinet on HPV. There is a quote from the book that HPV wrote based on the what Blavatsky was telling Sinet. Sinet was wanted to write the history of HPB's life, and she was sending him letters narrating him her histories about her childhood and her experiences. And here is also a quote that has been used by others to um, um, suggest that Madame Blavatsky had some psychopathological problems, some mental illness. Open quote, when a child, daring and fearless in everything else, she got often scared into fits through her own hallucinations. She felt certain of being persecuted by what she called the terrible glaring eyes, invisible to everyone else, and often attributed by her to the most inoffensive, inanimate objects, an idea that appeared quite ridiculous to the bystanders. As to herself, she would shut her eyes tight during such visions and run away to hide from the ghostly glances thrown on her by pieces of furniture or articles of dress, screaming desperately and frightening the whole household. At other times, she would be seized with fits of laughter, explaining them by the amusing pranks of her invisible companions. She found these in every dark corner, in every bush of the thick park that surrounded our village during the summer month. While in winter, when all our family, this is probably her auntie, it may be a quotation of Sinet from one testimony of HPB's aunt, immigrated back to town. She seemed to meet them again in the vast reception rooms of the first floor, entirely deserted from midnight till morning. Every locked door. Helen was found several times during the night hours in those dark apartments in half conscious states, sometimes fast asleep and unable to say how she got there from our common bedroom and so on. She was obviously suffering some form of somnambulism, sleepwalking when such experiences was happening. She was, of course, seeing things that scared her, seeing beautiful things, scary things. She had many psychic experiences when she was a child. Now, based on the material I just quoted and many other sources within the same sources that I quoted. Some scholars and some people, they thought, okay, Blavatsky may have had some sort of mental illness. After all, the dominant view in the academic and the scientific world also, because even though psychoanalysis, the psychoanalytic tradition of Freud is not a scientific field, but it influenced immensely all other fields. So the general idea is that such experiences are linked to hysteria and mental illness of different kinds. So we have Marion Mead. Marion Mead, she's very hostile against HPB. Some people, they are very hostile, and I don't know why, because I think that as a scholar or academics, they have to try to be, to study and to approach things with some form of neutrality in order to show facts and not ideas that based on biases that may have in their minds. Anyway, so Marion Mead said psychoanalytical or parapsychological, sorry for the accent, literature is rich in references to individuals with Blavatsky's supposedly distinctive characteristics. These are women who write letters in handwriting not their own, who have hallucinatory experiences, who invent languages, who give birth to cosmic philosophies, and compare charming accounts of life after death. The most common explanation offered for such behavior is multiple or disintegrated personalities. This is the ID, dissociative identity disorder. In Madame Blavatsky's case, it seems fairly clear that she possessed an hysteric personality. Obviously, Mitch doesn't know Russians. And uh, throughout her life, suffered periodic experiences of dissociation along with definite personality alterations. She called HPB a self-induced, she said HPB is self-induced schizophrenia. So she moved on actually from the ID to schizophrenia. So much she likes HPB. I must mention here that Mead's research is very problematic. I understand that when I was researching about Agardi Metrovich, this is a digression that I'm making. Research which I have finalized, and Professor Santucci is waiting for me to submit this research 3 years now, and I didn't have time to wrap it up. But what I want to mention is that when I was researching on Metrovich, I went to see Mead, what she was saying about him. And Mead specifically mentioned that because HPB said Metrovich was a very famous opera singer. And Mead said, this cannot be, she's lying. He wasn't a famous opera singer because I have looked in all English dictionaries focusing on musicians, and I couldn't find his name. So he may have been a musician, but not famous. Of course, there is a problem into researching the life of H.P.B. Blavatsky, and the problem is focusing only on the English language and expecting to find all the material in the English language. This is not possible. So I came to find information that Agar Dmitrovich was actually a famous singer, but not in the English speaking world. And then I found information from friends a scholar who lives in Turkey, with material in Turkish language, with material in the Russian language, in which it shows clearly that Metrovich was a very famous singer. So one needs to be very careful when reading myths, and because she's very biased, and her approach is, in my opinion, a very reckless and not reliable. So now then we have a more modern scholar here who suggested that Blavatsky suffered from dissociative identity disorder, previously referred, as I said, to multiple personality disorder, because she wrote her two major works, Is Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine, in an altered state of consciousness. She did wrote the books in an altered state of consciousness. We have also Alcott, which I did not mention many times, describing how HPB, when sometimes she was changing personality and she was passing her hands in the face like she had a beard or something, how she was walking different, and so on. However, it's very important to say that such viewpoints, they are based on the assumption that religious experience is psychopathological and it's linked to mental illness, which will very soon, I will show you now, that it's not exactly like that and how things are changing. Just kind of getting confused. Change the slides. Okay, now we need briefly to understand what is dissociative identity disorder. So DID is a complex psychological condition caused by factors such as an emotional neglect or abuse, severe trauma during early childhood, usually extreme, repetitive physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, and involve despersonalization, sense of being detached from one's body, derealization, this is the feeling that the world is not real or is looking foggy or far away. Amnesia, which is the failure to recall important personal information in conversations, like we are having a conversation right now, I say something important and you forget. Almost micro amnesias, forgetting a meaningful conversation from 1 second to the next. Identity confusion or identity alteration, a sense of confusion about who a person is. It involves also a number of other symptoms that they may be not all together, but one of them or two may be present when the person suffers from DID, which is depression, mood swings, suicidal tendencies, sleep disorders, night terror, anxiety, alcohol or drug abuse, and so on. Now, Madame Blavatsky, obviously, I mean, none of us, nobody, we cannot say we are normal and we don't have any psychological problem. We all have our up and downs, we all have our psychological shortcomings, and we all may have moments that we may become a little depressed for A or B reason, and we may move forward and so on. But as you know, Blavatsky, she was a person who she kept contact with her family her entire life. She traveled all her life. She was a very social person. She was a person that she didn't have amnesia. She had a lifestyle that it does not fit exactly with the picture of a person suffering of DID in the way that we just saw very briefly here. But then we will see, we will talk, I will show you it, clarify it better. So, considering Elena Petrovna Blavatsky's experiences, in light of the definition of mental illness, which I gave in the beginning of my lecture, which is an experience that causes suffering, family disturbances, occupational disruption, the inability to function in meaningful and healthy ways socially, it's not easy to include HPB in such categories because Elena Petrovna Blavatsky functioned socially. She maintained a relationship with her family. She wrote many books. She was the founder of a very influential organization during her lifetime, the Theosophical Society. So So the life she had, it seems, do not fit the idea of a person suffering from mental illness and DID. Now, linking religious experience to mental illness is a biased approach based on prejudicial assumptions, such as the one promoted by Freud, that religious experience is psychopathological. Okay. Now, there, there, there are some very important changes happening today, and in terms of how they see and approach such kinds of experiences. In 2016, the World Psychiatric Association issued a significant position statement on spirituality and religion in psychiatric, pointing out the importance of the relationship between religion and spirituality and health issues. The reason why they issued this report, this statement, is because in reviewing over 3,000 empirical research focusing on the relationship between mental illness and religion, it became evident that the religion and spiritual dimensions play a significant role in well-being. However, religion and spirituality may also harm by the refusal of accepting treatment, for example. Furthermore, the report also points out that religious and spiritual dimensions are essential for the majority of the world population, and that psychiatrists, this is very important, pay attention, that psychiatrists must take that into consideration. That means that the World Psychiatric Association is telling them that they have to take that into consideration. And by saying that, what's your understand is that they were not taking that in consideration. So it also acknowledged that very few medical schools offer training to equip psychiatrists with the knowledge and skills to address religious and spiritual issues. In this manner, the World Psychiatric Association suggested the inclusion in the core study curriculum in various countries, religion and spirituality. This is an amazing progress. However, it is also worrying if you think how many people may have somehow not being treated in the proper way when they needed some mental health support, because psychiatricians considered that anything related to religious experiences linked to mental illness. Now, the document suggests 7 guidelines related to religion and spirituality in treating patients with mental illness, that they need to take in consideration the patient's religious background and beliefs, the knowledge on what is the relationship between religion and mental illness, the need of more research in the field of religion and mental health. Treatment should be based on case-to-case, personalized. Psychiatrists should cooperate and work with religious leaders and pastoral workers. Psychiatrists need to express sensitivity and awareness to the importance of the role of religion in mental care. It is essential to know the relationship between religion and mental health, as well as mental illness, because the statement says that the World Psychiatric Association declaration says actually and acknowledges that spirituality and religion contributes also to the well-being, to mental health, and cannot be linked only to mental illness. So Why this statement is important? The World Psychiatric Association Declaration is relevant because it acknowledges that the study of religious experience, as well as the importance of such experiences, have been largely neglected by health professionals in the psychiatric area. It points out the need to understand the relationship between religious experience and mental health, suggesting at the same time that such a relationship may result either in mental illness or mental well-being. It distances from the view that religious experience is psychopathological, linked only to mental illness. Most importantly, it shows how religious experience has been neglected and that such neglecting must be overcome in mental health. Now, I'm finishing. How to know if a religious experience is psychopathological? And some of the guidelines were given by Moreira Almeida, who is a Brazilian psychiatrist, who was the one responsible and influenced the statements that we just read previously. Moreira Almeida and his research group suggested some non-pathological criteria to help psychiatrists to differentiate mental illness from religious experience. So he says, first, if the religious experience does not result in psychological suffering nor social impairment, it's not pathological, it's not mental illness. So the religious experiences or the spiritual experiences, or let's say the outraged states of consciousness Blavatsky was having, did not result in social impairment. It wasn't pathological. Now, if there are no other symptoms linked to psychopathological problems like cognitive impairments, if the religious experience can be controlled by the person, if the religious experience results in well-being, and when the religious experience is linked to some religious tradition. And finally, if there is no signal of social, personal, occupational impairment. Well, Madame Blavatsky fits in all these categories. So I'm using Madame Blavatsky as an example because for obviously reason. We are at the European School of Philosophy and I'm studying HPB. Now, in case the mentioned factors above are present, the relationship between mental illness and religious experience cannot be established. So we see that the assessments of many scholars in terms of trying to suggest that HPV suffered of DID, they are based on a viewpoint bias to altered states of consciousness, religious experiences, and so on. Now, how altered states of consciousness is interpreted in the theosophical literature. This is going to be my thesis, which I'm going to begin writing my academic thesis on the degree on the Master of Research that I'm doing on religious experience, and I may be present in this lecture for you next year at the European School of Philosophy in Scotland, not now. I'm closing now. I would like to close with the quote, which I'm closing my lecture with a quote that Henry Alcott opens the Old Diary Leaves. Strange, but true. For truth is always strange, stranger than fiction, if it could be told. Byron. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erica. That was very, very insightful and quite engaging. Thank you very much. I can see people clapping. I'm going to open up for questions. Does anyone want to have?
Yeah, can you remove the spotlight?
Yeah, I've removed the spotlight from you. So does anyone have any question for Erica?
Yes, I do. I'm Karen
Yes.
Smith from Canada. Hello, Erica. Thank you for this very interesting talk that you gave. There's one thing for